bring Detective Markowitz to the stand, the first detective on the scene to testify about his findings. Detective Markowitz will say it was a failed break-in turned into a murder, although Detective Markowitz will also report to seeing nothing being stolen that day, and to Mr. Brackman's residence only being in slight disarray. Finally, the prosecution will try to say that the text Alex Cifuentes received from Avery Beckard and the cell tower data alone are enough to prove Avery Beckard's guilt. One crucial factor that they're forgetting is that Avery Beckard never had her phone on the day of the late Mr. Brackman's murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today the prosecution has the burden of proof. The prosecution has been tasked with proving without a reasonable doubt that Avery Beckard, a senior in high school, broke into her mock trial coach's house on March 6th with the intention of breaking in and having left committed first-degree murder. If throughout today you find yourself with any doubt that Avery Beckard committed such a crime, we ask that you find Avery Beckard innocent and remember that Avery Beckard isn't a suspect, but a scapegoat. Thank you.
Thank you. Prosecution, call your first witness.
The prosecution calls Alex Cifuentes to the stand. Alex Cifuentes, please introduce yourself to the jury and judge and spell your last name for the record.
Hello, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Alex Cifuentes. Cifuentes is spelled S-I-F-U-E-N-T-E-S.
Alex Cifuentes, why are you here today?
I am here today to testify regarding to the murder of my old mock trial coach, Mr. Brackman.
And where do you go to school?
I recently graduated from Colorado High School with the defendant Avery Becker, as well as Taylor Perkins.
And how do you know Avery?
Avery and I have always been pretty good friends. She's actually the person who told me about mock trial in the first place, and she even convinced me to try out.
And what was your relationship like with the defendant?
It was good. I would say that we were friends. She would not say the same, I don't think. I personally myself am a very hard worker, especially when it comes to mock trial. It means a lot to me. So Avery was kind of a slacker, so that would kind of annoy me.
When did you first join the mock trial team?
My freshman year.
And did you have any friends on the team?
I'm a pretty outgoing and friendly person, so I would say I was friends with everyone on the team.
Would you say there was competition between you and the defendant?
I mean, there was the obvious competition between attorneys. We both wanted to win the Best Attorney Award, but I think there's competition with that with all attorneys. But other than that, just normal competitiveness between friends and teammates.
Do you think Mr. Brackman was a good coach?
Yes, he really helped us to win our competition, and I believe he was a great lawyer.
From your perspective, what was the defendant like as a member of the mock trial team?
Well, she was quite lazy and didn't put a lot of work into mock trial. She was always late and never prepared and always slacking off with her friend Taylor.
Can you explain how that made you feel?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm a really hard worker and I put a lot of effort and work into mock trial. So seeing her slack off really hurt me and it quite bugged me.
And how did your coach, Mackenzie Brackman, react to the defendant's behavior during mock trial practices?
I mean, obviously he would get mad and they got, sorry, and they got into quite a few fights despite about the matter.
How would you describe the relationship between Mr. Brackman and the defendant?
It was rocky. Like I said, they fought a lot.
And was the team affected by their relationship?
Yes, their fights made everyone really anxious and all of us really stressed out.
Now I have a few questions concerning the events prior to Mr. Brackman's death. Was the defendant ever punished by Mr. Brackman for not following directions?
Yes, one time because due to lack of preparation, and her constantly being late, Mr. Brackman actually moved Avery from our A team to our B team.
And was that effective?
Not really. Her best friend Taylor ended up quitting the team anyways so that she could get back on.
And what happened after that?
Well, after she got back on the A team, her and Avery and Mr. Brackman ended up getting into another fight, resulting in Avery writing on his car in a permanent marker worth the Tourney Award.
Where did you see Avery take the marker from?
Our paper easel.
And have you ever used a dry erase marker on a paper easel?
No, I have not.
Does your mock trial team use dry erase markers on paper easels?
No, never.
So from your knowledge, have you ever seen a dry erase marker used on a paper easel?
No, especially not from mock trial.
So how did Mr. Brackman respond to this?
Well, obviously he was enraged. I would be too. He ended up kicking her off the team for good.
And how was the team affected by this?
Well, even though Avery was a slacker and she annoyed me, this really hurt the team. Without her being on the team, we would not have been able to go to states, but ended up getting canceled anyways.
Did you want the defendant back on the team?
Yes, I mean, like I said, she did annoy me at times, but for the greater good of the team, it would have been better for her to be on the team.
Did the defendant ever talk to you about leaving the team?
Yes, she actually sent me a text asking for help back on the team.
But did she ever rejoin it?
No, Mr. Brackman wouldn't let her back on.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about this text message. How exactly did the defendant respond to not being allowed back on the team?
She was really mad. She was really upset and mad, which I understood, but I also understood where Mr. Brackman was coming from.
And she expressed this to you through a message, right?
Yes, this is correct.
Do you, Your Honor, permission to present Exhibit 14 to the witness.
Granted.
Alex Fuentes, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
Without going into detail, could you please explain what you're looking at?
These are messages between Avery and myself.
And how do you know that?
Well, I sent some of these messages myself and received them.
Would you say this exhibit is a fair and accurate representation of the messages sent between you and Avery?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, I move to admit Exhibit 14.
Does Team Ralph have any objections?
No, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Avery, what does the message towards the bottom say?
I believe you're referring to the message that says, "I'm going to wait until he is at work, then break in and trash it. That'll show him."
Co-counsel, you can stop presenting this exhibit. Mr. Fuentes, did you show anyone these messages?
Yes, I showed these messages to Detective Markowitz.
And did you show him on your phone or did you use screenshots?
I had to show him screenshots.
And why was that?
Well, you see, at the time, my phone was really old, so the battery would die super quick and I constantly had to charge it. So the day that I went to meet Mr. Detective Markowitz to talk with him, I accidentally left my phone charging, but when I got there, he said I could just send him screenshots.
And where's your phone now?
Well, like I was saying, it was really old, so I ended up getting rid of it.
Ms. Fuentes, do you believe the defendant acted on the statements made in those messages?
Yes, I do believe.
And do you think the defendant is capable of murder?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Objection. Speculation.
Ms. Armstrong?
One moment. This statement was based off of this witness's rationally based perception and her time spent with the defendant.
Overruled. And you're done, Ms. Armstrong?
Yes, correct.
Cross-examination?
So at the time of the murder, you were a junior at Colorado High School?
I believe I was a senior during the time of the murder.
Okay. And were you friends with Avery Becker?
Yes.
And she was the one who introduced you to mock trial.
Yeah, that's right.
But at the time of the murder, you were quite annoyed with her.
Well, I got annoyed with her on occasion, but I wouldn't say in general I was annoyed with her during the time of the murder.
And for as hardworking as you did during mock trial, you believe that you should have played a bigger role in the trials?
Yes, I put a lot of work into mock trial.
After Avery was removed from the team, you made an effort to talk to Mr. Brackman to let her back on the team.
Yes, I wanted Avery back on the team. I thought it would be for the greater good of our team.
And after the murder of Mr. Brackman, you were required to do an interview with police detectives.
Yes, I did have some interviews with some detectives.
And when you went down to the interview at the police station, you forgot your phone with the texts on it.
Yes, like I said, it was old, and so I had left it charging.
Do you have this, and you don't have this phone anymore?
No, like I said, I got rid of it.
And is there any way to prove the validity of these text messages?
I guess not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Yes, briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Cifuentes, would you ever create false text messages?
No, of course not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down, Ms. Fuentes. Prosecution's next witness.
Your Honor, the prosecution calls investigator Kyle Kuzak to the stand. Ms. Kuzak, could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Kyle Kuzak, and that's spelled K-U-Z-A-K.
Ms. Kuzak, what is your current job?
I'm a crime scene reconstruction investigator.
How much experience do you have?
I've been doing this for 19 years now.
Where do you currently work?
I work with the Denver Police Department, meaning I work with them and I'm not an actual police officer.
What types of crime do you investigate?
I investigate anything from burglaries, domestic violence cases, vandalism, even to homicides.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 702, I move to admit investigator Kyle Kuzak as an expert in crime scene reconstruction.
Any voir dire?
Permission to voir dire, Your Honor.
Granted.
Good morning, Ms. Cusack.
Good morning.
You have testified your opinions in front of the jury as a crime scene reconstruction investigator.
Yes.
You based your opinions on your investigation of the physical evidence, including the photographs and blood droplets.
Yes, but those were corrupted.
But you are not licensed in forensic science or examining blood splatter, is that correct?
No, but I am licensed in crime scene reconstruction, which is what I did. I went to the crime scene and I reconstructed the evidence.
Because you are not a police officer, but just a civilian employee of the Denver Police Department.
Yes, that's what I
You have
said.
only been working as a civilian employee of the DPD for 3 years.
I would say that 3 years is a pretty fairly long time.
Your Honor, I object to Cusack being an expert witness due to a lack of experience and certification with the nature of the crime.
I'm going to overrule. Ms. Cusack will be qualified as a crime scene expert in reconstruction investigation.
Ms. Cusack, how do you approach a crime scene?
I assume that every case is going to trial, so I try to record all of the evidence I find.
Why do you choose to record all of your evidence?
I think that a good process is really important because without one, you miss steps, which can lead to wrongful conviction. Sorry.
And is that how you approach this case?
Yes, as I said, that's how I approach every case.
What was your first step in investigating this case?
I went to the home of the murder and I tried to reconstruct the evidence.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen.
Granted.
I am showing investigator Kyle Cusack, previously marked Exhibit 17. Ms. Cusack, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a witness information tracking sheet, so it shows everyone that I interviewed and what they said and when I interviewed them.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of your work?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 17 into the evidence.
Any objection from the defense in admission of Exhibit 17?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 17 will be admitted.
Ms. Cusack, what does the first spreadsheet titled CSR Witness Information Tracking Sheet show?
It shows every single person I interviewed, when I interviewed them, and what they said.
And what does the second spreadsheet titled Evidence Tracking Sheet show?
It shows all of the evidence I found and when it was admitted into evidence.
Ms. Cusack, after reviewing all the evidence in this case, how did the intruder enter the home?
Through the back door by the kitchen.
Was the victim, Mr. Brockman, aware that there was an intruder?
Evidence points that he to the fact that he was prepared.
How did he become aware that there was an intruder?
He could have been notified by his Ring cameras, or he could have heard him.
And then what did the victim do to prepare?
He grabbed a knife from the knife block on the counter.
So what happened once the intruder entered the home?
They had a brawl in the kitchen, explaining the broken plate, and then the intruder took control of the knife and stabbed the victim.
And what happened after the victim was stabbed?
The intruder ran out the front door and the victim pulled the knife out.
Why did the intruder run out the front door?
I believe it's because he wasn't there intending on murder. He was there for burglary or vandalism.
What happened to Mr. Brockman after he was stabbed?
He pulled out the knife and crawled towards the front door.
And how did Mr. Brockman die?
He bled out internally.
Ms. Cusack, are you aware of Blake Van Owen?
I am. We've crossed paths on other cases.
Have you read Professor Van Owen's report on this case?
I have.
What are your thoughts?
I believe that Blake Van Owen missed steps. I believe that he missed evidence and he didn't take everything, or she didn't take everything into consideration. And there's many holes in their conclusion.
So to wrap things up, who do you think is the intruder?
Avery Becker.
Why do you think Avery Becker is the intruder?
The holes in the stories add up to him, to them being the murderer, and the height and build on the Ring video matches.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Let's start with the details of the crime scene. To your understanding, the digital files and photographs of the crime scene became partially corrupted, and the photographs of the blood droplets and cast-off were lost at some point.
That's true.
You were able to review the photographs prior to the file corruption.
Yes, that's correct.
The scuff marks near the door, the broken dish, the open knife drawer, and the empty slot in the knife block indicated that there was a struggle between the victim and perpetrator instead of a surprise attack.
Yes.
You were not able to recreate all event segments, although you thought that this seemed to be a straightforward home invasion crime.
Yes.
You stated that you would prefer if you had more physical evidence at the scene.
I prefer to have as much as evidence I can on any case. It makes my job much easier and it makes catching the intruder much easier and much more straightforward.
From the physical evidence that you had, you came to the conclusion that the victim was alerted by the ring security system as the intruder approached. The victim then looked for a defensive weapon from the knife drawer, but took a larger chef's knife from the knife block. There was then a struggle between the victim and perpetrator over the knife.
Correct.
The knife that was used to stab the victim is not the same brand of knife from the missing slot in the knife block.
No, it's not, but that's not completely surprising.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may be excused, Ms. Kuzak. Prosecution's witness.
The prosecution calls Detective Jordan Markowitz to the stand. Hello, Detective. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Good afternoon. My name is Detective Markowitz, and that is spelled Markowitz.
And what is your current occupation?
I'm a detective for the Denver Police Department.
How long have you served as a detective?
I've been a detective for the last 7 years, and I've worked in the Denver Police Department for the past 13.
Is there any particular field that you specialize in?
Yes, I specialize in cell phone technology and the collection of forensic data.
And how did you go about earning this specialization?
Well, I had to complete a certification from the American Academy of Law Enforcement. It covered things such as cell tower records, cellular data, and search engines such as Celebrite to acquire such data.
And how often do you use the analysis of cell phone data in your work?
All of the time. I've downloaded the contents of over 100 phones and used it in over 50 cases.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 702, I move to admit Detective Jordan Markowitz as an expert in crime scene investigation with an emphasis on cell phone analysis.
Any voir dire from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Do you have a cell phone technology and forensic recovery certificate?
I do.
To receive such certificate, you only completed a 3-day training course?
That is correct.
Your Honor, I object to Detective Jordan Markowitz being entered in as an expert in crime scene data recovery and cell phone technology due to the fact that his training was so short and not sufficient enough to grasp the full scope of his field.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to overrule that and qualify the expert in what the prosecution is offering him in. You can proceed.
Detective Markowitz, why are you here in court today?
I was assigned to the murder of Mackenzie Brackman.
And what was the date on which you found Mackenzie Brackman dead and was assigned to investigate?
On March 6th of 2020.
And what time did you arrive at the crime scene?
I arrived at 2:20 p.m. Mountain Standard Time after a motorist reported an unconscious body on the inside of the residence of 444 South Flower Street.
How was Brackman's body found?
In a pool of blood just inside the residence with a knife just out of reach of his body.
And Detective, as you continued your investigation, what did you notice on the outside of the house?
I noticed a couple of ring recording video doorbells.
And what did the inside of the house look like?
Well, as you enter through the back, you could see that there was a plate shattered on the ground and a chair askew from its normal place. And since the plate was shattered on the ground, it didn't appear to just be the normal messiness of the house. I then looked around and it seemed that all the other expensive items were left undisturbed, such as a couple laptops and a flat screen TV.
Taking this all into account, what was the next course of action in your investigation?
Well, I decided to download the phone contents of Brackman's phone.
And after you downloaded the contents of Brackman's phone, what did you notice that seemed to be particularly noteworthy or relevant to your investigation?
Well, I found two very notable things. The first were the videos of an intruder entering the Brackman residence at the time of the murder. You could see a masked figure walking up to the front door, and it appeared to be locked. So the intruder, a couple seconds later, opens the back gate on another recording device, and then you can see that the intruder then goes through the back door, which appears to be open.
And were these the videos from the Ring doorbell footage?
They were.
What else did you find on Brackman's phone?
Well, I looked around and there are a lot of emails and texts about something called mock trial. I looked into it and he was apparently the coach of the local high school mock trial team.
And how did you use this information in your investigation?
Well, I contacted the school to see if I could get any numbers and contact anyone from the team.
And after you tried to contact members of the team, were you able to interview any of them?
Yes, the first person I contacted was Alex Cifuentes. When I brought him in for an interview, she told me about a very strained relationship between Brackman and Avery, and they were always.
What's your objection?
Hearsay, Your Honor.
Ms. Parker?
No response at this time, Your Honor.
Sustained.
I'll move on. Were you ever able to interview Avery Becker?
I had an interview set up, but then later Avery's lawyer said that all contact would have to go through her. And so we had to reschedule an interview, but unfortunately no times had been able to be reached.
After you became unable to interview Ms. Becker, how did you go about continuing your investigation?
Well, I looked at the call detail records of Avery Becker's phone.
Detective Markowitz, would you mind explaining to the jury what exactly call detail records are?
Well, call detail records are commonly referred to as CDRs. And a CDR will tell you it's any communication between two phones, whether that be via call or text. And anytime one of those communications happens, it will connect to the nearest tower and tell you the location of the phone.
And what did these records from Avery Becker's phone show?
Well, you can see at around 1 p.m., Avery Becker's phone leaves her residence and moves throughout the residential area towards Brackman's house. At around 1:15, all communication stops at around Brackman's house, and then after that, there were no more communications made to Avery Becker's phone.
And based on the evidence you gathered in this case, what conclusions were you able to draw?
Well, since Avery's phone was there right at the time of the murder, and I believe that Avery Becker went to the Brackman's house. I do not know the intent, but I believe that right at the time of the murder, and from the video of the ring recordings, that Avery Becker entered the house and then later killed Brackman.
And what do you believe were the circumstances leading up to Detective Brackman's or Mr. Brackman's death?
Speculation.
Your Honor, this witness has been qualified as an expert in investigating crime scenes, and he has been a homicide detective for many years by now. He would be able to draw conclusions based on evidence and understanding the circumstances that would lead to the death of a victim of a homicide.
Overruled.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes. What do you believe the circumstances were that led to the death of Mr. Brackman?
Can you rephrase that question?
Sorry. How do you believe Mr. Brackman died?
Well, I believe that an intruder walked into Brackman's house through the backside, and Brackman must have been alerted by a ring notification, alerting him, and he decided to arm himself. There was a struggle indicated by the broken plate on the ground, and Brackman wound up dead.
And in your understanding, who do you believe this intruder was?
Well, from looking at the CDRs, you can see that Becker's phone was at Brackman's house during the murder, so I believe that Avery Becker was the intruder and eventual murderer.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Detective. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Go ahead.
Okay, let's start off with when you first arrived on the scene. You first arrived on the scene at 14:20 hours or 2:20 p.m.?
Yeah, so 2:20 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
And when you first arrived, you observed the victim face down with a knife in their upper left shoulder,
That is correct.
and you saw that the victim's shirt was blood-soaked.
Yes,
And from the position of the body you observed, you came to the conclusion that the victim had fallen while trying to reach for the door or leave the residency.
I'm not sure. All I know is that the victim was right inside of the residency and had been deceased by the time I reached.
You entered Mr. Brackman's residence through the back gate, correct?
That is correct.
And when you entered, you found the gate was unlatched.
Yes,
And since it was unlatched, there was no sign of forced entry.
that is correct.
And once inside the residence, you saw that it was only in slight disarray.
Well, there was a plate broken on the ground, and I don't think that would be the normal state of the house, but it was, and the rest of the house seemed undisturbed, so I would consider it slight disarray.
But you agreed not that this could just be the normal state of the residence.
It could have been.
While in Mr. Brackman's residence, did you perceive anything to be missing?
No, all of the expensive items like the laptops and flat screen TVs were all still there, so I didn't believe that there was any valuable possessions taken.
Now let's move on to the conclusion you drew. In many homicides you've investigated, you came to the conclusion that the victim had caught the intruder breaking into the house.
That is correct.
And then Mr. Brackman confronted the intruder with a knife.
I believe that is so.
And then you concluded that the intruder got control of the knife.
Yes.
Also, based on the evidence at the scene, you said it looked like Brackman interrupted a random burglary.
It seems so. I don't think that Brackman was prepared. And from earlier text messages between Alex and Avery, you could see that Avery had the intent of burglary.
Finally, I'd like to ask you about your previous run-ins with Mr. Brackman. Being a homicide detective, you've had your fair share of run-ins with the late Mr. Brackman.
Yeah, I'd been on some cases with him. He was usually a defense attorney, and I most of the time would work for the prosecution, so he would sometimes cross me.
And you believe that Mr. Brackman took cheap shots while performing his cross-examination?
Objection, relevance.
Ms. Leager?
I'm just trying to prove what the relationship was, the relationship between the Detective Markowitz and the late Mr. Brackman.
What's the relevance?
I think it just proves what their relationship was like and what their professional relationship looked like when they worked together.
Okay, I'll allow it. Overruled.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Of course. You believe that Brackman took cheap shots while performing his cross-examination?
Yes, I mean, most lawyers do it. I think it's perfectly fine to do in the courtroom, and I didn't really have a problem with it.
And you believe that the fact that Brackman did criminal defense work raised the specter that this could be the work of an ex-client of his?
That could have been possible, yeah.
Now moving on to Brackman's phone records, or the CDRs as you call them. You found a number of texts pertaining to something called mock trial, correct?
That is correct.
And although it seemed highly unlikely that Brackman's mock trial activity Sorry. You thought it seemed highly unlikely that Brackman's mock trial activity had anything to do with his death?
Well, in every investigation, you want to gather all the evidence and have everything within the scope of possibility. So I think that could have been anyone, but since Avery Becker's phone was at the scene of the crime and then later disposed of, I do think it was Avery Becker.
Okay. According to your analysis, Avery Becker's phone could be traced to cell tower 1197-1, or the cell tower near Brackman's house.
Yes.
But were you aware that Avery had lost her phone the previous day?
I did hear something about that, yes.
And were you aware that Avery Becker was unable to find her phone?
I know that the phone was disposed of and there was no further communication after the murder, but I do not know that she was unable to find the phone.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Brief redirect, Your Honor. Detective Markowitz, did your knowledge that Brackman had been a mock trial coach become relevant to your case?
Well, since there was such a strained relationship between Avery and Brackman, and from all the fights, and I later learned of Avery writing on Brackman's Porsche Worst Attorney Award, it seemed that it was quite possible that this could have been a student on the mock trial team.
And would you have been made aware of any of this if you hadn't followed up on the potential lead that was his mock trial work?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any additional witnesses from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor, the prosecution rests at this time.
Thank you. Does the defense have any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Avery Becker to the stand. Good morning, Ms. Becker. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name and spell the last for the jury?
Avery Becker, Becker.
Do you know why you were called here today?
Yes, I am being accused for murdering Mackenzie Brackman.
You go to high school last year.
I went to Colorado High School, also known as CHS.
What activities did you participate in at CHS?
I participated in mock trial and was looking forward to winning Best Attorney Award.
How did you know the late Mr. Brackman?
Mr. Brackman was our mock trial coach, and he was loved among all of us.
What was your relationship like with Mr. Brackman?
Our relationship was a little bit rocky. He was always getting on my case for being lazy.
Now I'd like to talk about what happened a month before regionals. Can you recall what happened a month before the regional tournament last year?
Mr. Brackman kicked me off the A team and demoted me to the B team.
What happened after you were kicked off the team?
I was really mad, and so I got Taylor Perkins to quit the team because we both knew the mock trial team would never win without me.
How did the regional tournament end up going for you?
The regional tournament went well. I won Best Attorney Award.
Now moving on to the Tuesday night after regionals. What happened that night?
Brackman was getting on my case again for not doing the work and how I should have followed his work that he put in for me. And so I walked out of practice and I accidentally wrote Worst Attorney Award on his car in permanent marker. I really thought it was a dry erase marker and that it would wash away, and it was the dumbest prank I have ever pulled.
What happened after that?
Brackman came out to apologize to me, and he saw what I had wrote, and he kicked me off the team permanently.
What did you do after this?
I was so angry, and I went home and cried to my mom.
What happened the next day after this unfortunate incident?
My mom told me to go and apologize to him, and so I went to his office. His secretary, however, told me that he did not want to see me at that time.
How did you end up apologizing to Mr. Brackman?
I had to apologize via text, although I really did want to apologize in person.
Now moving on to the day before the murder, or March 5th. What did you do that day?
I went to the fry shack with Taylor Perkins.
What did you and Taylor do?
We played games on my phone.
And do you mind reminding everyone here who Taylor is to you?
Taylor is my best friend.
Do you remember seeing anyone from CHS at the fry shack?
Yes, I remember seeing Alex Cifuentes and Blair Rollins.
Are you good friends with Alex Fuentes?
No, I would consider us enemies.
What did you and Taylor do after going to the fry shack?
We went to the mall.
And now moving on to the day of the murder, or March 6th. When did you last see your phone?
I last saw my phone on March 5th.
On March 6th, did you go looking for your phone?
Taylor and I decided to skip school that day and go looking for my phone.
Where did you guys end up looking for your phone?
We went to the mall since that was the last place we had been, and then we went to the fry shack and we decided we'd wait there for the afternoon shift.
Do you have any idea what could have happened to your phone?
No, other than someone could have either stolen it or it died because we kept calling it and no one answered.
Do you have any idea who might have stolen your phone?
I believe that Alex Cifuentes and Blair Rollins stole my phone.
I'm now going to be showing you what has been previously marked as Exhibit 14. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Okay. I placed an arrow next to the last text. Would you please read that for me?
I'm going to wait until he's at work, then break in and trash it.
Do you recognize this photo?
No, I do not.
Do you remember sending these texts at all?
No.
Do you have any idea how these texts could have been sent?
I previously stated I believe Alex Cifuentes and Blair Rollins stole my phone and sent these texts.
Did you ever think about trashing Blackman's house as stated in that text message?
No, I would never do something to hurt Brackman.
Why do you think Alex claimed you sent these texts that state such horrible things?
I think she was setting me up.
What was the relationship like between Alex and Blair Rollins?
Alex and Blair Rollins were very good friends.
What does Blair Rollins look like?
Blair Rollins has the same type of build that I do.
Why does Blair Rollins hate Mr. Brackman?
I'm sorry, may you repeat that?
Yeah. Why does Blair Rollins hate Mr. Brackman?
Blair Rollins hates Mr. Brackman because her dad got on trial and Brackman was her dad's lawyer and got him arrested.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Becker. I'd like to start by talking about your relationship with the victim. So you and Mr. Brackman disagreed a lot, is that correct?
We disagreed almost every practice, yes.
And you were mad at Mr. Brackman for kicking you off the team?
This really angered me.
And you were mad at him for insulting your work ethic, right?
I really did not think I was being lazy.
And you wanted to get back at him for disrespecting you?
Not really, but I did not like how he disrespected me.
You even wrote Worst Attorney Award on Mr. Brackman's car, is that correct?
Yes, although I never meant to do that in permanent marker.
But you did write it in Sharpie, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Ms. Becker, do you know the difference between a Sharpie and a whiteboard marker?
Yes.
Objection, relevance.
Ms. Armstrong?
I believe this is relevant because the defendant is, this incident was a large part of her motive and past actions that led to the crime. And I believe that the fact that she wrote with Sharpie shows her willingness to go to certain measures with her relationship with the victim.
Overruled.
Okay. So, Miss Becker, as you wrote with the Sharpie Worst Attorney Award on Mr. Brackman's Portia, you did think it was a whiteboard marker, just to be clear.
Yes.
And after this incident, you were kicked off the team, right?
I really did not like how I was kicked off the team.
So it made you upset.
I was really angry about that.
And did you try to get back on the team?
Yes.
So Taylor Perkins is your best friend, right?
Yes, she is my best friend.
And she would do a lot for you?
Yes, she even quit the team for me.
So you did really want to stay on the team, so much as to have your best friend quit for you?
Yes, I loved mock trial.
And you spent the day of Mr. Brackman's death with Taylor Perkins?
That is correct.
You even skipped school that day to drive around looking for your lost phone, right?
Yes.
So no one can account for your whereabouts that day other than Taylor Perkins?
That is correct.
And Taylor Perkins is also the only one who can account for your lost phone, right?
Technically, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, a brief one. Did you care about your phone a lot?
I did care about my phone.
Would you say it was like your third kidney?
I would say it was my third kidney.
So you went looking for it because it's such an important thing for you, so important that you would even skip school?
That is correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. This witness may step down. Call your next witness.
The defense would like to call Taylor Perkins to the stand. Good afternoon, Ms. Perkins. Can you please state your full name and spell out your last for the jury?
Taylor Perkins, Perkins.
What high school did you attend?
I went to Colorado High School.
Did you participate in any clubs?
Yeah, I was in mock trial.
How did you feel about being in mock trial?
I really only did it for my best friend Avery. It wasn't one of my big interests.
How was Avery's preparation for mock trial meetings? How was Avery's preparation for mock trial meetings?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. How was Avery's preparation for mock trial meetings?
Her preparation was really poor, but she still excelled really well.
Okay, no. I would now like you to recall back to before the regional tournament last year. How was Avery's preparedness during the practice a month before the regional tournament?
Her preparedness was bad, but she still did really well during the tournament.
Was there any reaction from the coach to Avery's insufficient preparation?
Mr. Brackman demoted her to the B team.
What did you do about this?
I stepped down from the A team and quit the team so that Avery could get put back on the A team.
Did Avery continue to do mock trial after you left the team?
Yeah, she did.
On Thursday after school, after Avery got kicked off the team, what did you and Avery do?
We played games on our phones and then went to Fry Shack.
Did you see anyone from your school at the Fry Shack?
Yeah, some of the mock trial team members were there.
What happened there?
Avery got upset and left her phone on the table and stormed off to the bathroom.
The next morning, what did you do?
I texted Avery if we were gonna carpool to school together because that's what we usually did. But she didn't respond to my texts.
Did you ever go look for her phone?
Yeah, we did. Once we realized it was lost, we decided to retrace our steps and go look for it.
Where did you go?
We went to the stores we were at the mall, and then when we didn't find it there, I remembered she had left it on the table at Fry Shack, so we checked there.
While you were at the Fry Shack, did you see anyone that you know?
Yeah, the team members were there again.
Do you know why they were there?
Apparently Brackman hadn't showed up to practice, and so they decided to ditch and go to the Fry Shack.
Did you find the phone?
No, we never found it.
Let's now talk about the relationship between you and Blair Rowlands. Do you know Blair Rowlands?
Kind of, not super well.
What are your thoughts on them?
I always thought they were kind of weird, and I know they really didn't like Brackman because Brackman lost the case that got Rowland's dad put in jail.
Objection, speculation.
Ms. Senthilkumar?
I'm just asking the witness if he thinks that if he could describe Blair Rowlands.
Okay.
The witnesses may respond, Your Honor.
Yes.
The witness here is testifying to Blair Rowlands' opinion of Coach Brackman. However, the witness has testified that she did not know Mr. Rowlands very well, and even if she did, she's not qualified to testify to the state of mind or personal opinions of Mr. Rowlands.
Sustained.
I'll just move on. To your knowledge, was Blair Rowlands at school the Friday that Coach Brackman was murdered?
They were not at school.
Were you anywhere near Brackman's house that day?
No, I was with Avery the whole day.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
I have a brief cross-examination, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Perkins, you were on the mock trial team in high school, correct?
Yes, I was.
Is it true that you joined the mock trial team because of your best friend, Avery Becker?
Yeah, I only did it for her.
And Mr. Brackman, your coach, expected consistent preparedness from the whole team, is that correct?
He did.
But Avery would tend to come to practice relatively unprepared.
Although she was unprepared, she still performed extremely well.
But yet she did not meet Mr. Brackman's expectations for preparedness for practice.
No, she did not.
And because of that, Mr. Brackman and Avery would have their differences, is that correct?
Yes.
And this dispute would get on Avery's nerves, didn't it? I believe the witness is frozen.
Oh, there she is.
Could you repeat the question, please?
And the disputes with Mr. Brackman would get on Avery's nerves, wouldn't they?
I think any disagreement would get on people's nerves.
And this got on Avery's nerves enough that she felt the need to play some pranks on Mr. Brackman.
They were meant to be pranks, nothing permanent.
But one of these pranks was riding on Mr. Brackman's vehicle.
It was.
And you were always on Avery's side in these disagreements, weren't you?
Well, she was my best friend, and I could see her side of the story.
And you agreed with Avery that Coach Brackman made bad decisions for the team.
I think occasionally he did, yes.
And that sometimes he could be a bad coach.
Occasionally, yes.
When Avery was demoted from the A team by Mr. Brackman, you quit, correct?
Yes, I did.
You quit so Avery could get her spot on the team back before the regional competition.
Yeah, I think she deserved it more than I did.
And you did this because you've been best friends.
Yes.
And Avery went on to do very well at regionals, didn't she?
She did. She won a few awards.
Yet Mr. Brackman was still unhappy with her.
Yes.
And Mr. Brackman's response made Avery very upset, didn't it?
It did.
In fact, you'd say it made her so upset that she went and wrote Worst Attorney Award across the hood of his car.
She meant to do that as a small prank, not as anything permanent.
In fact, in your words, she did this to let off some steam. Is that correct?
Yes, but not with any bad intentions of it being permanent.
As well as to freak out Coach Brackman.
Yes.
And this got her kicked off the team for good, didn't it?
Yes, she was kicked off the team.
And you thought this was unfair, didn't you?
Yes, it was unfair that she was kicked off.
And Avery did everything she could to get back on the team, is that correct?
Yeah, she really wanted to be back on the team.
And she contacted all of the members of the team trying to do what she could.
Yes.
But Mr. Brackman still did not let Avery back on the team.
No, she was still kicked off.
In your words, Avery can be rash sometimes, can't she?
I think anyone can be.
That was not the question, and I was asking if specifically Avery Becker can be rash sometimes.
Avery can be, yes.
And have an inflated ego?
Yes.
Ms. Perkins, let's briefly discuss the day of March 6th. You claim to be with Avery that entire day, don't you?
I was with her the whole day.
Did you and Avery go to school that day?
No, we didn't.
Because you were helping your best friend look for her phone.
Yeah.
And you and Avery claim to have never found the phone.
No, we never found the phone.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, this witness may step down. Does the defense have any other witnesses? Mr. Brooks, I think your mic is off. There you go.
I would like to call Blake Van Owens to the stand. Good evening, Blake Van Owens.
Good evening.
Please state your full name and spell the last for the jury.
Blake Van Owens. Owens is spelled O-W-E-N-S.
And what is your occupation?
A private investigator, a professor, and an expert witness in police practices.
And do you have any past occupations?
The Aurora Police Department.
And after you left the police department, were there any other jobs?
I worked at a school as a school resource officer, a private security guard, and then went into private investigation.
And how did you become a private investigator?
I was a professor, and that opened up many opportunities.
What do you testify in as a private investigator?
Expert in crime scene reconstruction, cell tower analysis, and general police investigation tactics.
And what states have you been accepted in as a defense expert?
Colorado, Kansas, and Arizona, and in state courts in Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and New Mexico.
And have you participated in any court cases?
Yes. Crime scene reconstruction 8 times, cell tower analysis 5 times, and in general police investigation tactics 12 times. I've been consulted on more than 100 cases.
Your Honor, based on Rule 702, I would like to offer Professor Blake Van Owens as an expert in crime scene reconstruction, cell tower analysis, and general police investigation and forensic evidence techniques.
Any voir dire?
No voir dire, Your Honor.
Mr. Owens will be admitted as a crime scene analyst, cell tower analyst, a forensic evidence analyst, and there was a fourth thing, right, Mr. Brooks?
Yes, general police investigation.
All right, qualified as such.
Have you reviewed the police reports and Kyle Kuzak's and David Markowitz's investigation?
Yes.
And do you have anything to say on it?
It was rushed and the important information was left out of the case. There were many parts where important investigation was left out.
And do you personally know either of these detectives?
I professionally know Kyle Quiz from various conferences we had both attended.
Moving on to the investigation, how did you start the investigation?
I started in the
I'll restate the question. How did you start your investigation?
Can you hear us, Miss Owens?
I'm sorry, you were frozen. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. How did you start the investigation?
I started in the places overlooked by the other detectives.
And what places did you relook?
Crime scene reconstruction, the other suspects, and the phone data.
And starting with the investigation of the crime scene, where did you begin?
I began by examining the crime scene photos.
When reviewing the crime scene photos, did you notice anything?
I noticed that there was little, if any, evidence of physical altercation.
Could you elaborate?
The only apparent evidence of a struggle was the scuff marks on the floor by the back door, and we have no way of knowing when these were made. There's no evidence that demonstrates that these scuff marks were made during the incident.
And were there any other inconsistencies between the crime scene photos and detective work?
Yes, the murder weapon was chosen and the knives in the block proved to be different. The murder weapon was clearly inconsistent with the style and blade dimensions of the otherwise orderly and same set knives that were there.
Moving on to the cell tower report, where did you begin?
I reviewed the report from Detective Markowitz.
And based on your expertise, what do the cell towers show us?
It only shows that Avery Becker's phone was near the time of the murder.
And does this mean anything?
Yes, Avery Becker lost her phone the day of the murder and they were looking for it. They confirmed that they did not have it and were looking for it the day of the murder.
And did you notice anything else about the cell tower data?
Cell tower data is not remotely like GPS information. Since we do not have the actual phone, we can't look at its GPS date. We don't actually know that the phone was even near the victim's house.
Okay, moving on. Do you believe there were any other motives to kill Mr. Brackman?
Yes.
And could you elaborate?
Blair Rawlings, who also attended CHS before the time of the murder, had much stronger motives to kill Mr. Brackman.
Why is this?
A few months before the murder, Brackman had represented Jolyn Rollins, Blair's father, who had been charged with murder. Jolyn Rollins was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. This is a much stronger motive than being kicked off of a high school mock trial team.
And where was Blair Rawlings on the day of the murder?
Reviewing the school reports, I discovered that Rawlings was absent on the day of the murder.
What is the significance of Blair Rawlings in this case?
I believe Blair proves that the case didn't go nearly in depth in their investigation. The investigation has left significant doubt to those who committed this crime.
No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Professor Van Owens. So, you believe that the intruder entered the house with the intent to kill Mr. Brackman, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that the intruder would have had no way to know whether Mr. Brackman was home during the workday?
Yes.
Isn't it also true that for the intruder to have snuck up on Mr. Brackman, he would have had to been much more careful?
Yes.
Because when the door he would have entered, wouldn't that have made noise?
Yes.
And the footsteps against the hardwood floor also would have made noise.
Also, yes.
So it would have been nearly impossible for the intruder to have snuck up behind Mr. Brackman at his own dining room table without him noticing.
Yes.
Next, you believe that the knife used in the murder was brought in by the intruder, correct?
Yes.
You have no explanation for why the knife drawer in Mr. Brackman's home was left open, do you?
No.
You also have no explanation for how the intruder got the knife into the house, do you?
It was probably brought in by the perpetrator.
Isn't it true that in the Ring security camera footage, you can clearly see there is nothing in the intruder's hands?
Yes.
So then, isn't it true that you have no explanation for how the intruder got the knife into the house?
The intruder was wearing a hoodie.
We both agree that this was a large chef's knife used in the attack, correct?
Yes.
Is that a yes, Professor Van Owens?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be extremely difficult to hide a large blade about this big under a hoodie?
Yes, but it could be possible.
Moving on to your critiques of the prosecution's case. You believe that the investigation was rushed, don't you?
Yes.
Isn't it true that both investigator Kuzak and Detective Markowitz have certifications you don't have?
Yes.
You also critique the police for not looking into Blair Rollins enough, right? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Isn't it true that on Mr. Kuzak's spreadsheets, you can clearly see that Blair Rollins is listed as a possible third suspect?
Yes.
Isn't it also true that on Detective Markowitz's maps of the cell towers, Blair Rollins' house is pinpointed on the map?
Yes.
So isn't it true that the police were by all means aware of Blair Rollins?
Yes.
And finally, I would like to talk about your critiques of the cell tower data. So you critique Detective Markowitz for not pulling the records for the day before the murder, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that you yourself didn't pull the records from the day before the murder either?
Yes, and that is something I regret.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, at this time, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Van Owen, you may step down. Any other defense witnesses?
The defense rests, Your Honor.
All right, let's proceed to closing. Is the prosecution ready to close?
Yes, we are, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'd like to reserve any remaining time for rebuttal.
Granted.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This case was about a defendant who wanted revenge. It started with disagreements between her and the victim. Avery deeply despised Coach Brackman. She proved her willingness to go to extreme measures to retaliate against him by writing in permanent marker all over his beloved Porsche. In a text, she mentioned a plan to break into his home. The day of Mr. Brackman's death, Avery Becker skipped school to look for her missing phone, which Detective Markowitz located in the area of Mr. Brackman's home. With her loyal best friend willing to cover her, Avery Becker had the entire day to prepare for her attack and go through with it. Mackenzie Brackman died as a result of her actions that day. However, much like Sharpie on a Porsche, this is a crime that just can't be erased. Today, the prosecution has the burden of proof, meaning we must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Becker committed murder in the first degree and second degree burglary of a dwelling. Our first witness in this case was Alex Cifuentes, a colleague of Avery Becker's on the mock trial team. Cifuentes provided details on the rocky relationship between Avery Becker and their coach, as well as knowledge of Becker's plans to break into his home. Cifuentes outlined the defendant's clear motive behind this crime. Next was Kyle Kuzak, a certified crime scene reconstruction investigator. Cusack gave you a detailed chronology of the events of March 6th. Cusack tells us the likelihood of Avery Becker having committed this crime based off of his detailed knowledge in this field. Our final witness was Detective Jordan Markowitz, who has extensive experience with cell phone technology and forensic data. Detective Markowitz told you that Avery Becker's phone was in the proximity of Brackman's house, and using his expert knowledge, he also concluded that Avery Becker committed these crimes. The defendant told you her excuse for the day of Mackenzie Brackman's murder, that she spent the day looking for her phone. Yet the only corroboration we get of this comes from her best friend, Taylor Perkins, who we've established is biased. Taylor Perkins told you that she would do anything to get Avery Becker back on the team, and that she skipped school the entire day of Mr. Brackman's death alone with Miss Becker to look for her phone. The defense also told you that our explanation of Brackman's death is wrong and improbable. However, the defense's expert witness, Blake Van Owen, never actually went to the scene of the crime, and certainly doesn't possess the level of expertise in crime scene reconstruction that Kyle Cusack does. You have heard that the defense's narrative for this case is that Avery Becker's phone was stolen and given to Blair Rollins. For Blair Rollins to have obtained Avery's phone, Alex Cifuentes would have had to steal it for her. Alex Cifuentes had no motive to steal Avery Becker's phone, much less aid the framing of someone she considered a friend, as well as aiding the death of her beloved coach. In the end, Avery had motive, she had a plan, and she had a convenient excuse. What Avery doesn't realize is that this crime is one she just can't erase. After you consider all of the evidence in this case, we ask that you find the defendant guilty of second-degree burglary of a dwelling and murder in the first degree.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Defense closing?
Yes. Suspect not scapegoat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today has shown that Avery Becker has been a platform for the prosecution and nothing more. We've proven that there is not enough evidence to convict Avery Becker with first-degree murder and second-degree burglary of Mr. Brackman's house. The prosecution has built their entire case on assumptions and faulty evidence. First, you heard from Avery Becker, whose unstable relationship with Mr. Brackman and past mistakes have been put against her to cause an untrue narrative, trying to paint Avery as an unstable and terrible person. All she wanted to do was make things right with her and Mr. Brackman, repairing the damage that she had caused. Next, you heard from Avery's best friend, Taylor Perkins, who told authorities that she was with her the entire day at the mall looking for her lost phone, which detectives later said was near the house of Mr. Brackman. Taylor also pointed out a possible suspect in Blair Rollins, who had mysteriously disappeared on the day of the murder and has not been seen since. Finally, Professor Blake Van Owens shed light on the many mistakes that were made while reviewing the police reports and crime scene. He proved that Avery Becker could have not possibly committed the crime with her stature. And on the prosecution, Detective Jordan Markowitz, who completed a complete investigation. However, the improper procedures to obtain the screenshots of Alex's text messages, despite Alex even offering to go back to the station with the phone. Kyle Cusack, whose entire investigation was built off of minimal evidence and using easy conclusions instead of digging deeper within the case. Alex Cifuentes wanted Avery off the team. Her biased opinions held power within the prosecution's investigation, causing simple facts to be overlooked. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today the prosecution holds the burden of proof, which they have failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Becker is guilty. They have used Avery as a scapegoat to make their investigation easier, not looking further into the facts and using untrustworthy evidence from a jealous high schooler who wanted a bigger role on the mock trial team, and who would benefit from Avery out of the picture. People of the jury, you must rule that Avery Becker is not guilty on charges of murder in the first degree and second degree burglary of Mr. Brackman's house. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Prosecution?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Avery Becker is not a scapegoat. With all of the evidence pointing to Avery Becker's guilt, how could she possibly be a scapegoat? From her hatred for the victim to threats that couldn't be spelled out any clearer, to an excuse for the day of the victim's murder that is backed up by a friend who's proven her undying loyalty time and time again. Avery Becker is far from a scapegoat. Avery Becker is here today because she is guilty. There's no need to reiterate all of the evidence that proves her guilt. What must happen now lies in your hands. Just like the Sharpie she wrote with on the victim's Porsche, Avery Becker cannot erase this crime, and you shouldn't let her. We ask that you find Avery Becker guilty.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. For those that are watching, we're going to end the live stream right now so that the judges can give any comments and feedback to the teams if they